Welcome to the Discover Montcalm podcast, where we're going to take a look at the communities, the businesses, the attractions, and the people that make up Montcalm County. Here is your podcast host, Dwayne Weed.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Discover Montcalm podcast. I thank you for tuning in. I have a special guest here from the Howard City area, Bill Smith. Bill, thank you so much for taking time to come in and talk to me about some of your career and living and growing up here in Howard City. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Let's go back to the beginning. You grew up in the Howard City area.
I did.
Were you born here? Let's start from birth and go through your early childhood real quick.
Actually, I was born up north in a little town called Central Lake.
Okay.
And I moved to Howard City in the 5th grade. And so I've been here since the 5th grade. My folks owned a grocery store on Main Street, and so it's called Smith's IGA.
Okay.
And so I'm a product of the 50s.
Okay. So was that back in the 50s that the grocery store was here?
Yes. In the mid-50s, believe it or not, there were 3 grocery stores on Main Street.
Because I understood at one point there was a lot of grocery stores for the size of our town.
There were 3 grocery stores on that one block of Main Street. There were 2 hardwares, 2 barber shops, a theater. And so Friday and Saturday nights at Howard City during the 50s were big nights.
Everybody would come to town for shopping, get together.
Farmers would bring their eggs and products in and exchange them with the retailers and so forth. Yeah.
When you grew up, you graduated then from what is called Edgerton?
Edgerton. All 13 grades were in that small building.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't Tri-County at that time. It was just Howard City High School.
Okay.
That was 1958.
1958. So you graduate in 1958, and what was the town like? You kind of gave us a little hint here that, Fridays and Saturdays is when everybody came in, and it was very social. What were some other uniquenesses of Howard City, Montcalm County in that era of the 50s?
Well, one of the things was you never locked your doors, or you left the keys in the car at night. You just never worried about things like you do today. Everybody knew everybody. Businesses were closed on Sunday. Churches were vibrant. Even though Howard City had less population back then, it was just a fun place to grow up.
Okay.
Small town mid-America.
Back then in the 50s, how active was the train system through here? Were they doing passenger at that time, or did that fall off before the 50s?
I don't remember a lot about it, except, yes, there were trains that came through, and it would have been passenger trains. And of course, you know where the depot is, right there.
Yep.
Close to Main Street. So.
Well, I know in the early 1900s, the train was basically the main transportation, and it was very vibrant at that time. And there was a depot there. There's a depot right down the street from me. There was a depot in, Pearson and Sand Lake, and, you can go right on down the line, or if you want to go back to the north, and it pulled and went over by Amble. I mean, it just was everywhere. Was it that vibrant with the rail system at the time in the 50s, or was it basically what is now called the rail trail? So back, you said 1958 is when you graduated.
I graduated.
Where did you go from there?
Well, as I said, I grew up in the grocery business behind the meat counter. So what I knew, my friends from graduating, they were going to get married, they were going in the service, they had a job, they knew what they were going to do. I didn't know what I was going to do, except all I knew was I knew the grocery business. So I said to my parents, I want to go to butcher school in Toledo.
Okay.
And we did that, came back, short 6 or 8 weeks, I don't remember. Came back, I walked in the store, My dad pulled the keys out and said, "Here it is, do you want it?" I said, "No thanks, I don't." Got in my car, went to Grand Rapids, got a room at the YMCA, and started looking for a job.
At what point did you meet this guy or this family, the Meijer family?
Well, at the time, we're talking 1959 now, and they just had a few small struggling grocery stores at the time. There's no such thing as thrifty acres as we know it today. And I actually started in the office for the head meat buyer, and I was the gopher. I was a delivery boy. I was pick up the papers.
And where was that location at that time?
That was above the Michigan and Fuller store, in the office above the store.
Okay, and for those of you that haven't figured it out, we're talking about Meijer. Fred Meijer, Hendrik Meijer. You went to work for Hendrik Meijer.
For Fred, and you asked me, I met him the first day.
Okay.
I met him the first day, and in fact, this little booklet right here.
Yeah, we got this book.
It says, "Just call me Fred." The first day, he introduced himself, and I called him Mr. Meijer, and he said,
"Just call me
Just
Fred."
call me Fred.
Okay.
And that's the way it was for 41 years.
Okay.
Until I retired.
So you spent your career at Meijer, and with your parents offering you the keys to the store, kind of a bold move at that point to go, but you found your path. Through your career at Meijer, what kind of titles, you start off in the meat department as a gopher, and then through the course of the next 40-ish years, what types of things did you do?
Well, you got to remember, Meijer was growing at the time. They went through some rough years where they almost lost the business, especially when they built the big stores, the thrifty acre stores. So we were growing. The company was growing, and new positions became available. So I was in charge of training. I was a buyer. I was a grocery specialist. I was in properties. Fred had a belief, promote from within.
Okay.
And so when a job would open up, they'd look in the company and see who might have the qualifications for that job, and they'd put that person in there.
Okay.
So I had about a dozen different jobs from the time I started.
But you enjoyed it.
Always.
I know you and I were talking off camera about how when you work a job you enjoy, it makes all the difference in the world.
I love going to work.
I'm just going to open it up randomly. This is full of little quotes. First one says, "My dad and I had more fun than two people are entitled to." You put all these quotes together. When did you start taking notes about, because obviously these all came from him, and there's quite a few of them here.
101.
There's 101. At what point in your career did you go, oh, wait a minute, I should be jotting some of this down?
Actually, right at first, I'd be in a meeting, and I'd hear Fred say something, I'd say, I don't want to forget that. I'd grab a napkin and I'd write on it, and I just put it in a file in a drawer, and so 40 years later, I pulled them all out. And
well, here's another one. People are only loyal to things they help create or improve.
think about that. People are only loyal to things they help create or improve. And Fred was very good at delegating and letting people make their own way. And that's where that quote comes from.
And we could probably spend, as long as it would take us to go through 101 of them, everyone wants to feel important.
And the Meijer family was good at that. Fred was very good at that. In today's big businesses, the offices, you'll see signs that says parking reserved for the president or whatever. Fred always parked the furthest in the parking lot and would pick up any trash on the way in.
Yeah.
Fred would never buy a new car. when I became an executive and they gave me a car, and we turned them in at 50,000 miles, Fred would go around and say, "How's that Oldsmobile? Can I have it when you're done?"
Okay.
Because he wouldn't have a new car. He would take the used cars. So he taught us. I learned so much from him about dignity and respect.
Oh, speaking of respect, I opened up to another page. Learn to enjoy and respect each other's differences.
And Fred was very good with minorities. I remember in the office when he wanted to hire a black man as the manager of the office, he went to each person in the office, small company now, remember, and said, "This is what I'd like to do, what do you think?" And people, of course, didn't want to say to Fred, "I don't like the idea," but they would say, "Well, I don't care, but such and such, they might," and he would say, "I'm going to ask that, I'm going to ask everybody in the office. I only want to know what you think." And of course, he hired.
Well, and if we have to go back to that early 60s era, 60s into the 70s, to kind of more appreciate, I believe, what you just said, because that was not as common at that point. Now, I was just a little kid in the 60s, so I don't remember much of that aspect of things, but I was always taught it didn't matter who they were, you respected them. And if my dad ever found out that I didn't, there was going to be heck to pay when I got home.
Well, Fred taught us all that, and I can remember when a group of managers were going to Chicago and taking with them one of the black managers, Fred said, if they don't allow him in the meeting or in the rooms or whatever, you get up and you all leave.
Okay.
So he was very big into minorities and women's rights.
And the fact that that was one aspect, but it was just across the board respect for everyone. Treat everybody the way you want to be treated. I mean, there's a lot to be said, but you witnessed it.
I learned so much from that man, yeah.
If you could, and this might be a easy question and a harder answer. Over the course, you mentioned that you've learned so much from him. If you could pull one takeaway, what would that one takeaway be?
His humility. And it was not only that, it was throughout the family. I mean, it was a family trait. Of course, Fred and Lena had 3 sons, 2 of which all 3 of them were involved with the business. And in fact, the oldest one runs the company right now, Hank. But it was ingrained in the whole family. It was ingrained in the company. And Fred, as I said, Fred wanted to hire from within. Nowadays, what I've observed is big companies, when they have an executive opening, they want 3 things. They want this person to come from a long ways away, cost a lot of money, and have a lot of letters after their name. And then, if they got all 3 of those, they got to be good. Well, that's not what I observed.
Okay.
Homegrown management is worth a lot.
And you're still involved, even though you retired back in 2001. You're still kind of involved with the family now. And we're going to get into that in a little bit more right after we thank our sponsors.
We'd like to thank our sponsors. West Michigan Technology and Design Solutions is your perfect choice for managed IT, website design, website hosting, and consulting services. WMTDS.com, 616-485-7600. Custom vinyl signs and Busy Bee Embroidery and Gifts is your one-stop shop for embroidery, vinyl, screen printing, and engraving needs. Go to cvsdbusybees.com. or call 989-261-7446. And DW Video, your film and videotape specialist. They design websites and business videos that tell and share your story. DWVideo.com, 231-250-9624. Now, back to our podcast.
We're coming back now with Bill Smith. He grew up, was in the Howard City area. He spent 40-some years at Meijer, a resident of the area, and has done a lot. But before we go into some more talk about Fred and what it was like around here, you can pick up Discover Montcalm podcast at discovermontcalmpodcast.com, on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. Just type in Discover Montcalm podcast and you can find us. So you've got these couple books that you've written, and this one that's called, Just Call Me Fred. These are not available, they're not published, but you said that this one is used internally. This is, because I guess I did not realize this, that it says complimentary edition. So, and you wrote this while you were still working at Meijer, and you didn't want people to know that you wrote this, so you have, I noticed in here it says WSS, and then it says a student. So that way it didn't come back. At what point did people start realizing that you wrote this?
I'm not sure. A lot of people wouldn't have, but it's one of those things. I saved those little quotes over the 40 years, and I said, this is too good. I mean, there's too many new people here that haven't really heard what Fred feels like. Mm-hmm. Because, you got Fred up in the main office, and you got the people in the stores doing the bagging, and they don't really understand what that person is like normally.
Right.
So I had the opportunity to understand and to be able to share that.
This was your way of giving back.
Yes.
Your way of giving back. And then prior to that book, you had wrote a book here called Fred
Actually,
Meijer.
this one came afterward.
Oh, this one was after.
This came after I retired in 2001.
And so I can tell that if I was to ask you the question, and I've asked people this, but I know the answer here, he's probably one of the few people that influenced your life the most.
You got to remember, Fred Meijer pioneered one-stop shopping. I mean, I can remember the president of the company, Earl Holton, another person I respect very highly, was coming from a meeting of retailers when Fred was trying to put together a combination store, mm-hmm. general merchandise and food. And the professor of that said, Earl, it's nice that you guys are going to try that, but it's not going to work. People are not going to buy a dress and put it through with the carrots.
Oh, okay.
So Fred was really swimming uphill with his idea of this one-stop shopping concept. And from that, Walmart came up and studied Meijer. Mm. And then they started building supercenters. But Fred was the pioneer of one-stop shopping.
And it worked out well for him and his family.
It did, but there were 3 times that he almost went broke.
I think if you look at most successful people, you can find where they've been bankrupt at least once. When you started, how many stores, you said it was when they were building, but when you started, how many stores did they have at that time?
There was only 12. Back in 1959 when I started, there was only 12 little supermarkets. One of those you close at 10 o'clock at night, open at 7 o'clock in the morning. There were 600 people in the employees, mm-hmm. now known as team members. There were only 600 people mm-hmm. in the whole company. And when I retired, there was over 50,000.
Right. And up to how many stores now? 200 and some or more?
There's 260 stores. And the reason Walmart has been able to grow so fast is they're a public company.
Okay.
They got all the public money from stockholders and so forth. Meijer has said, Fred Meijer has said, we want to control the land and the buildings and have control over everything and not have to answer to stockholders every quarter.
Okay.
And so that's why Meijer's only in 7 states, Walmart's in 50 countries, yeah.
What are some of your earliest memories of, or not just earliest, but some of your grander moments of living here in the smaller town?
I'm just a country boy at heart. Small town, the people, knowing everybody. So I don't want to live in the city.
Well, and I always like it. I grew up in the big metropolis of Morley, But I always liked the opportunity that we could be small town, and yet within a half hour I can be in the city. We've kind of talked a lot about the Meijer influence, a little bit of growing up. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would like to share?
No, as I said, though, growing up in the 50s, it was a lot safer. The churches were busy. The businesses closed on Sunday. It's just completely different today.
Yeah. And times do change. I'm going to ask one last question, because you grew up here. In your opinion, why should someone discover Montcalm County, and why?
Just to get away from all the businesses in the city. I mean, there's nothing like country living. Mm-hmm. There's nothing like country people. There's nothing like hometown. I just can't imagine why you wouldn't want to.
Thank you for taking time to share this story on the Discover Montcalm podcast. Thank all of you for tuning in. You can catch us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook at Discover Montcalm Podcast, or go to discovermontcalmpodcast.com, and all the past episodes are there. If you've got an idea, if you've grown up in this area, you have a business, you're part of an organization, please reach out to me at 231-250-9624. That's 231-250-9624. I'd love to be able to tell your story. Bill, thank you again.
My pleasure.
Remember to buy and shop locally.
Connect and subscribe to Discover Montcalm Podcast at discovermontcalmpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Discover Montcalm Podcast. To be featured in an upcoming show, contact Dwayne at 231-250-9624. Remember to subscribe at discovermontcalmpodcast.com.